Hey everybody, Edo here, and I am excited this morning because I have Bradly Halestorm on the line. Say hello, Bradly.
Hey guys, thanks for having me, Ed.
Oh, absolutely. And Bradly is the founder of LionWing Publishing, which is a publishing house that specializes in bringing anime, Japanese-themed games to the U.S. and localizing them as sort of the emphasis of what you do as a publishing house, right? And that's super, super interesting to me. And I'm very curious about that entire process, how you got into it and all that. You also have a Kickstarter coming up, Embryo Machine in a couple weeks, and we can talk about that at the end. But we're going to focus on like what it means to like be a localization house in the United States. Okay, to start though, like, who are you? How did you get to it? Like, I mean, presumably you're into anime, but like, what's the, what was your entry into games and this business?
Sure, yeah. So I founded LionWing in December of 2017. So for all intents and purposes, we started as a company in 2018. We launched our first Kickstarter the summer of 2018. But before I got into this industry, specifically with localization, I was in the video games localization industry for a number of years.
Cool.
Yeah. So I was a localization editor, some project management stuff, that kind of thing, mostly on Japanese visual novels, RPGs, MMOs, that kind of thing. Anyway, so I'd been a part of that industry for a long time, since like 2010 or so in some capacity. And one day, it just dawned on me that, hey, I really like localization. I love Japanese games. There aren't a lot of people bringing Japanese tabletop games to the West. I should parlay my experience in localization to this industry that I love. And so I said, all right, we're doing this board game thing. And so I put my head down and started the company about 8 weeks after my wife and I had our first kid. And we're getting ready to sell a house and buy a new house. And it was a great time ever. Yeah,
exactly.
Let me tell you, I'd do it all the same again. I don't know if I would.
Well, no, before you go on, and so in terms of at the time, you're like, with kid and all, were you playing Japanese board games at the time on your own, or had you not even really played Japanese? Like, were you familiar with the Japanese board game scene, or was this something you're about to walk into?
Yeah, I was already playing Japanese board games at the time, and so now, of course, since then, I have played a lot more since it's sort of become my business. But yeah, I was playing them at the time. Actually, what's interesting is, so I've been playing board games. I mean, I've got the same story as everyone. I've been playing tabletop games since I was a kid or whatever. But I was always more inclined toward video games until probably 6 years ago or so now. I
realized board games are more fun.
Well, there's that. Yes, absolutely. But I had never really given them the chance to prove to me how fun they were, because I was always consumed with video games. I mean, it's how I made my money. It's what I did in my hobby, even my free time. But I came down with a pretty gnarly repetitive stress injury in my wrist. Too much gaming, too much editing, too much scrolling on the computer through lines of edits. And I realized every time that I tried to play video games, I just got this excruciating pain in my arm. Yeah. It was my body saying like, dude, you're old. You need to hang it up. So I literally couldn't play games anymore. And I was like, I have to find something to do. And so I said, let me get back into tabletop games. And ever since then, that was 2014, 2015. And it's been off to the races. Now, it took me another 2.5, 3 years to start LionWing, but in that lead up, those 3 years.
Well, not everyone makes the jump between like, I want to play games to being like, I'm going to be a publisher.
Yeah, right. So yeah, there was a little bit of time that went by, but I'm stoked to be in this industry, and I'm even more stoked to be in this corner of the industry, because it's a very unique corner of the industry. Again, not a lot of people are kind of hanging out in our corner.
No, it's really super unique. Both in terms of the content type, but also, again, there's tons of organizations that localize from the United States, and there are a lot of, like, I think it's typical, the big European companies also have a presence across, so they're handling it sort of, there's plenty of games that come to this country that weren't English first, but the only person I can think of, Chad Elkins at 25th Century Game has done like a couple of these, but he's doing a bunch of different, he's sort of an opportunistic guy where he finds interesting stuff, but to be really focused in like see a need, fill a need, you're like, this is what I'm going to solve. And so, okay, so we're going to fast back forward to you're selling your house, you have a newborn, you're like, I'm going to do this business thing. Like, how did you secure that first game? Is it sort of like people who reach out for translation? You're like, hey, by the way, I translated your game into English, and can I publish it? Or like, what was the? I mean, you must have done it in Japanese, which was a plus, but like, what?
Yeah, it was. I wish I had a more glamorous story than the one I'm going to tell. But it was October of 2017, and I had recently purchased in bulk a bunch of Japanese board games. This was right before I decided I was going to do this. I was going to start LionWing. And so I got all the games in. I was playing them. I kind of had the idea concurrently of like, yeah, I really should do something with this. The idea had floated around in my head before then, but that bulk of games, that particular Saturday night when I opened them all up to play them, really had sort of a change on my trajectory and my career, my life in many regards. And I was playing one of the games called Sonoma Coliseum R. And it was just this moment where I was like, I'm having so much fun with this. Like, this is such like a silly, awesome game. Like, I want other people to experience the joy that I'm having right now with this particular game. And so, I flipped to the back of the box. I looked at the design company more seriously. I said, okay, MR Entertainment, I'm going to track them down. And so I tracked them down on social media. I found their website. I went to their contact us button and I cold emailed them and basically said, hey, so here's what's going on. I just played your game. I love it. I'm thinking of starting this tabletop company that specializes in localization. I have a history in localization. That's my experience. Would you be open to partnering for a Western release of Sonoma Coliseum R? We would do all the work for you. You wouldn't have to do anything. This would be a very easy project, essentially, for you guys. We would take on all the work. And what do you think? They got back to me in like 2 days. And they were like, yeah, actually, let's do this. Give me more details. Like, put a contract in front of us. Show me what you're thinking. And so that's what I did. And when I got the email back from them, that was kind of my final, like, this is it moment. That was my green light of, okay, now we're doing this. This is no longer like a thing that's floating around in my head. We're going to go ahead and we're going to start this process and get this ball rolling. I'm going to form the company, and this is going to be our first project. We're going to utilize Kickstarter, and I'm going to do it in 6 months from now. Now, it turned out to be 8 months from that point, but I was close enough.
Well, the nice thing, at least on the Kickstarter side, is while obviously there's a lot of translation work to be done, and probably, all the layout work and the presentation, it's not that easy to translate Japanese to English without making layout changes. But you didn't have to do all the game existed, right? So you, at least like in terms of getting copies to reviewers or this or that, it was, so you didn't have to deal with that, but you have to do with all the other pieces. And I didn't actually look up your Kickstarter. I'm curious, like, for the first one, what was the initial goal? How did you do? Like, it was a explosion out of the box? Was it barely funded? How was that first one for you?
Well, it certainly wasn't an explosion. I'll tell you that much. So our ask was, I think, 10,000 or 10.5, and then we ended up with 18-ish.
All right, so you're still in niche category right now.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I'll tell you what, like, I didn't know anything about Kickstarter at the time, especially board game Kickstarter, and I didn't even market the game. I don't think I sent out a press release. If I did, I sent out one, and that was it. I was just like, oh, I just put this game on Kickstarter, and then, like, that's how it happens, right? And then just, like, people find it. Little did I know after that there's way more that goes into a Kickstarter than that. But I had no marketing budget, no marketing presence, nothing. I just threw it up on Kickstarter and kind of hoped for the best and thought, well, some people will find it. And I think the game sells itself. If nothing else, its aesthetic is fantastic. And then hopefully once people get to the page, they'll look at some of the playthroughs and they'll like what they see. And
to the extent you're able to, you at 18,000, right? I mean, that's, I assume that's sort of like 500 backers type of thing.
No, it was 293.
293. Okay, so it was like a $50 or $60 game.
Yeah, we had multiple tiers.
Yeah,
and we had 3 tiers, and I think most people went for the middle tier.
So you're, and this is the beginning. Like, how many did you print? Did you print like 1,000? And you're like, I'll do some here, and I'll sell the other 500. Did you print like 5,000? Like, what? How did you get into retail? Are you even in retail, or are you just direct sales from your site?
Yeah, so I'll work backwards. We are in retail, in a limited capacity. We
Sure.
did work. I linked up with a consolidator so that they could help sort of like the in-channel marketing aspect of things, because I had no idea what I was doing there.
And you know, just because the folks who actually the 100 folks who are going to watch our video and our conversation or so are actually fairly knowledgeable typically. Is it, I mean, are we talking about PSI, Impression, somebody else?
No, it was someone else. And it was Studio 2 Publishing,
Okay.
Based out of Tennessee. I had contacted some of the larger companies, and they were all kind of like, yeah, no. And I get it. It was a small project and very niche art. But so I printed 1,000.
Okay.
And figured I will sell the rest either through the consolidator, or I'll do it through an online store, and that's primarily been the sale since then.
I'm sorry, I'm going to keep asking you some specific questions. So, and when you say you printed 1,000, just because I'm in all these localization deals from the other side, I don't remember the name of the company, but did they take care of the printing, or did you have like a separate manufacturing that you managed, or did you like, here are the files, send me 1,000 copies?
No, I took care of everything.
Okay.
All they did was send us the files. And,
so you printed in a different printer than they printed in, presumably.
Absolutely. Yeah, okay, and in a different country.
All right. Right. So this isn't, so in terms of localization deals, which, you know, I'm sort of bouncing around, but like there's the version where you're like, hey, you know, I'm going to pay you this percentage of MSRP and you're just going to send me the games or I'll pay for shipment, but you manufacture them, you handle the whole thing. And then there's this other one where you're like, no, I'm going to take care of printing it and all these steps, and then I'll do the payment we agreed to in this manner. So interesting. So that's a big thing to like. That's a huge leap, right? Like from just saying I'm going to localize files to like, no, I'll localize the files, manage the print run, and do all that is a lot of work. Okay, so keep going with the story.
Yeah. So it is a lot of work. It was a big undertaking. I thought the whole process was going to be much easier. Of course, I was so naive then. And so I was like, oh yeah, I could do this. There's like 3 of us. We got this, working on this project. And yeah, it was a much larger project than I initially expected it to be. So, but yeah, so we got them printed, and I mean, that's the story of Sonoma Coliseum, and which, with localization, at least with us, we really try to make it as easy as possible on our partners, because I want to present them an offer they can't refuse. And so it really is for all of our localization partners, like, all you have to do is give us the assets, answer our questions along the way, approve our layout changes, approve, you know, some of our naming changes, make sure we got the rules right. And that's it. And then we will make sure that we pay you, you know, quarterly in royalties, and we'll pay you a good royalty. And that's that. So we really try to make it as lucrative for our design partners and attractive for potential partners as possible.
Hey man, paying quarterly puts you 4 times faster than most partners pay. So okay, hold on a second. So there's a lot in here. All right. One, just out of curiosity, for this first title, so like you're coming onto your 4th Kickstarter, is that correct, or more?
Yeah, so this will be our 4th solo Kickstarter. Okay. We did a joint Kickstarter earlier in 2020.
And then as you've done more, you know, like you're becoming the source for this type of content for a specific audience. So I assume the 300 people who backed the first one and loved it are like, we're going to be in every single one of these. Like how have your Kickstarters trended, like in size? Is it like 300, 600, 1,000, or how's it grown?
Yeah, so it definitely has grown, and we certainly have we've got carryover in our audience. Folks who back one project, I have observed, tend to back our next project. So we started off at 293, and actually by the time that like credit cards were ran and everything, I think we ended up with 274 backers in that first Kickstarter.
Oh yeah, all those people fall off.
Gotta love that. And then our next solo Kickstarter, we jumped up to like 1,500.
That's a big jump.
It was a very big jump, and we came pretty close to that in our most recent Kickstarter. Awesome. For Gun and Gun, which was a even more niche competitive Japanese card game. And based on signups thus far on our Kickstarter lander page for Embryo Machine, we're looking, we're looking to repeat those numbers, if not improve on them for this fourth project. So we're growing steadily.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like anime and this genre. Not genre's not the right word, but this type of content isn't gigantic, right? Like it's a huge like, I mean, even you could say it was growing in the 80s and 90s, but like growing again with all of Netflix and everything bringing so much of this content to the States, among 100 other Crunchyroll and stuff like that. But okay, so one of the pitfalls Kickstarter creators have often, which you seem like you were sort of saved from, but I still want to ask my question, is they'll like make a game, visual style A, genre A, and then they'll do their second Kickstarter and they'll be like, oh, my first game was a miniatures, war game, and now I'm going to make like a cute card game, or like they do the shift and they expect their audience to come, and they don't. I mean, they might like look at the page, but like no one likes a company enough to buy a game in a genre they're not interested in playing in. Hate to break it to folks. So a lot of it's not uncommon. But I would assume, the thread in all of yours in the anime piece of it is a big deal. But how consistent have you been in terms of gameplay genre? Like, do you have a type of game you like that you take and you source, or is it like when you source, are you sourcing based on genre? Are you sourcing based on anime popularity? Are you sourcing based purely on just the projects you want to work on? Like, what's your process for thinking about Embryo Machine, which is coming up, or your next game?
Sure. So I do think that there has to be a golden thread. For me, for LionWing, there has to be a golden thread for us tying all of our projects together. When someone sees our game on a shelf or on Kickstarter or wherever, I want them to say, oh, that looks like a LionWing game. Oh, it is a LionWing game. Right. And so I do like games to occupy similar spaces, but I also don't want to just repeat the same game over and over.
Sure.
That's not good for the consumer, and also it's boring for me. I'm usually pretty heavily directly involved in a lot of the localization work, and so I need a game that's interesting to me, right, so that I can produce the best work that I can. I tend to produce the best work when I'm interested in something. Go figure, right? But I'll tell you what, maybe this is the wrong approach, but despite wanting games to occupy similar spaces and have a certain vibrant aesthetic, a lot of our games have very vibrant aesthetics. If I don't like a game, I don't want it. Sure. I really only localize and publish games that I like and that I play. That's kind of like first and foremost. It's kind of like, do I like this game? Okay, cool. That's all right. Now we can move on to the next set of criteria.
Right. Well, I mean, I think that makes sense to me. At some point, maybe it changes, and so then I guess we talked about the growth in Kickstarter and that audience, which to me I think sounds, if you run a Kickstarter, do a good job, deliver, and again you're in this space that doesn't have an abundance of games, right? You're really mining this. You're like the only guy off in that part of the forest, mining or whatever, cave, whatever it is. But how has your story changed at all at retail? Like, have you reprinted any of the titles, or is there more attention outside of this group that's happening, or is it like, no, we basically do the Kickstarter, print a few extras, and move on?
Yeah, so our print runs now are much larger, 3 times larger than Sinome for our most recent one. And so the print runs are getting larger because we're getting a larger interest from retail. Even retailers backing the project on Kickstarter. Usually we have a retail tier, or we'll tell folks in the body of the campaign that, hey, if you're a retailer, contact us and we will talk about retail deals. So there does seem to be a growing interest from retailers, and I don't know if that's a growing interest in us exactly, or if that's a growing interest in the anime board game space. Maybe both.
I think so, and I think a third category is probably a growing interest from retailers in general for working directly with publishers outside of other distribution channels. So yeah. I think that's a factor as well. It's actually not the topic of this video in any way, but there's a lot of very active debate and discussion right now in terms of retailers backing Kickstarter creators, and all that. But we'll just set that aside. But so sure. So you're seeing that growth, which is fantastic. How, like, do you feel like you've made a blip in the Japanese publisher scene? Like, do you feel like, has anyone reached out to you saying, hey, you want to try our game? Or have they asked for prints? Have they said, hey, that game did really well. Can you do Europe distribution or this other, like, how's that side of it been?
Yeah. So the answer to both of those questions is yes. So we somewhat recently got our first Japanese designer who contacted us and said, "Hey, I know you through this way. Here's my game. Would you have any interest in it?" So that it does seem that our name is spreading within the community. Even the folks who I've reached out to discuss a partnership with them have said, "Oh yeah, I know of you. I've heard about you." Right. So our presence is growing overseas as well, which is great. And yes, we've had designers say, "Would it be possible, to look at a European distribution in addition to your North American distribution?" And we're not ready to do that. I'm not there yet, but certainly in the future, I want that to be a consideration. But right now, my focus is primarily, on North America.
Cool. Again, it's a very interesting business model. I think so. I guess. In terms, you said, you were three folks, or at least initially, when you look at your business today, I was having a recent conversation with AJ about sort of unit economics and a variety of things. But one of the things that we talked about was sort of the crawl, walk, run stage. Like right now, are you sort of campaign to campaign, and each campaign is really what's driving your business? Or do you feel like, no, there's enough momentum on reprints and some of these other deals that, like, are you seeing more and more rapid, like, sort of not profit, but business growth? Or you're like, no, it's still just, it's growing, but it's a steady line?
Yeah, I'm seeing momentum, especially in the latter half of 2020. That's really when it kind of came into view that, hold on, something's happening here, to the point that thus far we have been a Kickstarter exclusive company. And in 2021, we will still produce Kickstarters, but we will also be releasing our first non-Kickstarter.
Oh, there you go.
Traditional distribution modeled game in 2021. In fact, probably two. So yeah, I'm seeing the growth happen.
Interesting. Yeah, there have, over the years, there's always a number of publishers that start making that shift from Kickstarter to just direct to retail, or direct to consumer, which is an interesting transition. I know that. I mean, obviously, James Stegmaier did it sort of in a big way after Scythe, but like even Keith Matejka from Thunderworks Games, who I talk with all the time, they decided to do their normal thing but take the risk with cartographers, which was very successful. And now when he's looking at titles, he sort of has an open debate: is this more of a Kickstarter thing, or is this more of a direct to retail thing? Yeah. Cool. Well, like, super thrilled that you were able to pull it off, right? Like, the idea of finding and grabbing all this awesome content that you'd otherwise not have localized or hear. I mean, in some ways, maybe not. The best case, though, might make it your life a little harder, would be like demonstration of market and competitors and more people trying to, bring more of this content and the audience gravitating towards it. Out of curiosity, because while I have a history and background with Japan, actually can't think of many non-traditional modern board games that are Japanese that I've ever played, because I sort of most of my time in Japan was pre being as deep into board games as it is now, as I am now. But are there like, from your perspective as sort of a connoisseur of these types of products, like, what would you say is hallmark or representative or typical difference between, like, mechanic wise or theme or dynamic wise of Japanese designers and their board games? Not so much the theme, but the actual games, and US centric. We hear about Euro style, or I'm not a big fan of the term, but Ameritrash. Or like we hear there's that sort of hack and slash beat 'em up, or like how would you categorize and think about, like, for somebody who doesn't have the perspective, like, how would you describe Japanese games generally?
Yeah, I mean, there are so many Japanese games coming out now, and that market has diversified significantly just in the past 2 years. That being said, I see some trends, and certainly these are trends that you can see all over the world, regardless of where someone's making games. There's a lot of competitive card games coming out of Japan, a lot. Even on a small indie level, which is awesome, which is really cool for us, because that's the kind of thing that we like. we see a lot of co-opers as well. A lot of Japanese games tend to be very theme heavy.
Right.
I mean, that's one of the things that I look for anyway. But there's a lot of overlap with mechanics as well. I mean, a designer in Japan and a designer in Europe are probably going to have some of the very similar ideas.
Sure.
How they approach that genre can be different, and sometimes it's a small spin on sort of a tried and true formula. Other times it's the exact mechanics you would see anywhere else in the world thrown in with an anime aesthetic.
Sure.
And it's amazing to me, and I never really realized this until I started getting into LionWing and doing what we do, that sometimes just the theming of something can change the feeling of a game. It can occupy the same genre space as another game and feel very different. So for instance, the Kickstarter we ran over the summer, Karate A Wild Hunt Festival, occupies the same exact space as Aeon Zen. They are the same game essentially. They're a boss battler, and you can level up, and it's hero based.
Sure.
And so they approach the genre in practically the same way, but you throw in a different art style,
Sure,
and a heavier emphasis on story. A lot of our games have a pretty good emphasis on story. And suddenly Wild Hunt Festival feels very different than Aeon Zen, even though if you broke down their mechanics, you'd say this is the same game by and large.
Right.
So I think the Japanese design scene is doing things the same and doing things differently. And sometimes it just comes down to the visual presentation of it all.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, and certainly the visual presentation super striking in all these titles. You answered my questions in terms of your upcoming Kickstarter. You want to give a little highlight for folks who might be interested in learning more?
Sure, yeah. So Embryo Machine is actually the first game that we've done that's probably the most different from the rest. So this harkens back to the question you asked earlier. All of our games prior to Embryo Machine have been card games of some kind. Not necessarily competitive card games, but they've been card driven. Be it a competitive card game, a boss battler, a second boss battler, because we've done 2 of those now, both in 2020, or a more cutesy mini game party game like our first project. Embryo Machine is a little bit more war game like. It's a tactical game where there's movement on a board with game pieces. The combat is card driven, but you've got cardboard standees, or you've got our deluxe edition that we're going to offer where we upgrade the standees for our Kickstarter backers. But
to miniatures?
It's not ready to say just yet.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Well, finish your thing, and then I'll ask you a couple questions.
Yeah, so folks will have to show up to see what that deluxe tier looks like. So it's different. It feels different. It looks different. It's our first mecha game. So if you love Gundam or Evangelion,
sure.
This is the game for you. This is like the game I've always wanted to do. I saw this game years ago and said, I want that game if I can. And fast forward 3 years, and here we are. I mean, I love mecha. A mecha is in our company logo design. So this was kind of like a dream project for me, especially coming from a designer with as much pedigree as Kozaic, who have done a host of fantastic games, including Shadowhunters. So it's our most ambitious project as well. It's our heaviest game. It's our biggest game. It's got the most moving parts. So I'm really excited. It was also our most challenging project because of all of that.
Sure.
And so I'm very proud of this project, and I'm excited to finally unveil it. This one's been in the works for a while. We revealed it just recently, but we've been working on this game in some capacity since early last year.
Sure. No, I mean, even in, working in your native language, as board games get bigger, they get bigger. And the more text, the more components, the more the more monstrous it is, for sure. Well, so okay, I don't want to spoil your surprise, and I certainly suggest everyone check it out. But if you take any of the stretch goal paths that you have, do any of them lead you to a place where you're manufacturing something that doesn't exist in the original or in the one that?
Yes.
And so that's interesting in and of itself, where you're going to hey, we've made this English edition with this thing or these things that makes it cool or different, variant from the original. Do you get question? Do you get a lot of backers from Japan, whether they're native Japanese or just what are those? I don't remember the term that's not the Japanese. All right, anyway, the people who are living in Japan but aren't Japanese.
Gaijins.
Yeah, well, that was the one I was. I'm not. I'm expats.
Oh, sure, yeah.
That was the one I was going to go for. But yeah. Anyway, I don't know how that word rings anymore.
Yeah, not a great connotation these days.
Yeah. So okay, but so that who order the English editions or not so much?
No, I mean, not a ton. We'll get a handful.
Sure,
that's it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for being on and the answering the barrage of questions. It's a super interesting business model, and like, more than anything, it's somebody who's passionate about these products, finding games that are fantastic and that you love, and then introducing them to another audience, right, and market. So certainly best of luck with your latest. I'm sure it'll be fantastic.
Thank you, and thanks for having me.
Yeah,
appreciate it.
Awesome. Bye. Hey everybody, Edo here, and thanks for watching Gaming with Edo. Reviews over here on this playlist, League and Insider videos over here on this one. Subscribe, share, all that good stuff. But most importantly, play some great games. Thanks. Bye.